Welcome to Circle City Conversations, where the heart of Indianapolis comes alive through the stories of its people. Join us as we explore our city, one insightful conversation at a time.
We are back for another episode of Circle City Conversations with Alex Limontes. This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Hurst Limontes, which is a personal injury law firm based in Indiana. For over 50 years, the lawyers at Hurst Limontes have been representing Hoosiers that have either been injured or had a family member killed in an accident or for something that was not of their own causing. They take complicated cases, they take tough cases, they fight for all of their clients, and they've been doing it for over 50 years and have a reputation for that. So thank you to our sponsors. If you're ever in a need of a lawyer, a good lawyer in Indianapolis or in Indiana, give them a call, Hurst Limontes. I am here with my guest, Charles Hubley, an attorney at Hurst Limontes, and someone that I've known for a few years, even before he became a lawyer. Charles, also known as Chip, as a lot of people call him, is a true trial lawyer. Motivated, I would say, maybe in equal parts by his disdain for the way insurance companies treat people, as well as his need, like the rest of us here, to intrinsic need to want to help people. So, Chip, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
So we usually start pretty easily. So let's talk a little bit about you. Where are you from originally?
Born here and raised in Indianapolis. Mm-hmm. So, going all the way back, I went to Allisonville Elementary School up there by where you live now. Yep. Ended up going to North Central High School. Ended up down in Bloomington for undergrad at Indiana University. Graduated with a degree in political science, minor in history. And then went down to South Florida, Coral Gables, to the University of Miami for law school. So kind of been a little bit all over the place. The Hurricanes.
So after you went down there, did you become a Hurricanes fan, or are you still a Hoosier fan?
I split my time. Hurricanes football, I'm pretty, I pay attention to, and unfortunately they haven't been as good as they should be as of late. They got beat at last weekend, actually, by Georgia Tech. So I do follow football and basketball. They actually beat the Indiana Hoosiers in March Madness last year.
Oh wow!
To go on the round of 32. So that was a little bit of a heartbreak, because I am a pretty dedicated IU basketball fan. Not that I don't watch IU football. I kind of know the outcome before it happens.
I feel like that's a common thread with some IU football fans. You know what's going to happen before it happens.
It's pretty unfortunate, but we are where we are, and we can't ask for too much from these schools. So the IU basketball is pretty good. They're typically field a pretty good team, but IU football not so much.
So you're local. You are a Hoosier, right?
I'm a Hoosier. I most of my life so far has been spent in Indianapolis, or the greater Indianapolis area. And I'm born and raised a Hoosier. So
you went to North Central. What's their mascot? Panthers?
They are the Panthers. That's right.
Yeah. Graduated
2005. Class of 2005. So
and then you went to undergrad. So why did you decide to go to law school? What made you want to go to law school?
Oh boy, I feel like that's a big question, but I do get that posed to me pretty consistently. I was a political science major, which forces you to read quite a bit. So I kind of had the reading testament down that lawyers need, in order to get into law school. You're going to do a ton of reading, and you kind of have to be interested in different things and like to investigate. My history minor, I think, kind of pointed me in that direction as well, because as lawyers, we're really looking at precedent, right? I mean, that's what we have to go on in terms of whether we think a case is viable, whether we think we can win, whether we think that we can get a good judgment or a good outcome for our clients, we're really looking at precedent and prior cases and things of that nature, which feeds right into history. So I've always been fascinated with history. I've also always been interested in how the law works and how it applies to regular people. There's so many laws on the books. I mean, I don't know how many statutory provisions in Indiana there are, but I know that they're in the thousands, and they get down to minutia. I mean, what types of fences you can have and in what areas. And I mean, dog breeds, what you can have and what you can't have. I mean, criminal matters. I mean, it's just, there's so much minutia. So, I mean, kind of the question for me was, why do these laws exist? And, if they're going to be imposed upon me or people that I love or people that I know, then I should probably kind of try to understand them to some extent. So I think that was kind of why I got into law, and, it's led me here.
So you went to University of Miami.
Yes.
You graduated. What did you decide to do?
Sure. So I went down to Miami to kind of get away from Indiana because I'd spent all my life here. So when I graduated from University of Miami, I had been working for a law firm down there, Patino Law Firm, and they did personal injury protection cases, which is a little bit different from what I'm doing up here. But I clerked for them for about 2 years before I graduated. And I don't know if you know this, but when I graduated, it was 2013, and I was getting ready to take the bar. It was historically the worst year for new hires of lawyers in the history of the legal profession, at least in the United States. So obviously there was a financial crisis, or we were on the kind of the tail end of the financial crisis. And I had been the beneficiary of the institution of Pell Grants from the Obama administration. And that's how I got my money to go to law school, is I took out Pell Grants from the United States government. So one of the, I think, unintended consequences of the United States government letting these, people get Pell Grants to go to school and, post-secondary education like I did, was there were a lot of people graduating, and there weren't enough jobs to fill the need from people graduating. So I got out of law school, and it was a terrible market for lawyers. I mean, I remember people passing the bar down in Florida, which is one of the toughest bars in the country, and they were working at Starbucks. I mean, these were smart people that I went to law school with that, really should have been probably working somewhere, contributing to the community down there in South Florida, which, I mean, they always need new lawyers down there, more lawyers. But I mean, there just weren't jobs. They just weren't there. And these people had they were saddled with all kinds of student loan debt that they weren't able to get started paying because they didn't have a job in the legal industry. So I got lucky because I had been working for these guys down there for a couple of years, and they gave me a shot, which, again, I got lucky because it could have been a pretty ugly situation if I didn't have any type of job lined up. But Richard Patino gave me a shot. They gave me a shot, and they actually put me right to work. So I was pretty lucky in that regard. So that's actually a really good point. And that's something that I struggled with coming out of law school as well, trying to find a job. And I think a lot of people do. Sounds to me like you established your networks early on. Is that fair? You have to. Yeah. Anybody who wants to go to law school or who's in law school, you got to get out and establish a network, especially if you're in a place where you don't know anybody. I mean, I went down to South Florida. I didn't know anybody down there. I didn't know a soul. I ended up meeting people who were from the Midwest, or from, there were a couple people in my class who were from Indiana that I had never met before. They were from different parts of Indiana. But if you go somewhere like South Florida and you spend your entire life in Indiana, you got to get out and you got to meet people and you got to expand your network, which is exactly what I did. So that was definitely part of the growth process for me down there, because I didn't have any connections. My dad couldn't call somebody and say, hey, my son got out of law school, but he doesn't have a job. Can he come clerk for you? There was nobody down there to call. So I had to do it all on my own, which was daunting at the time. So if let's say there's either a young lawyer or even a law student listening right now, number one piece of advice that you would give them is, it's never too early to start getting out there and start networking. Yeah. And, you can start small. If your family members, your parents, maybe they know a lawyer, maybe they've used a lawyer previously, reach out to that person. And they don't have to give you a clerkship. Just go out to lunch with them and ask them questions. I mean, because even if you're not even in law school yet, you want to ask questions about the legal profession. Hey, how do you like it? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? What kind of schooling did you take in order to get there? Ask them about their journey. People appreciate that kind of stuff. And it is important because at the very least, you have somebody, if you're in a situation that you don't know how to deal with in the legal profession, you can call that person or email them. And typically they'll be able to give you some kind of advice. Hey, you should call the Indiana or the Florida bar about this because I don't really have a good answer for it. You could call this person. They deal in this type of particular law. And then, of course, that's kind of galvanizing referral partners, which we both know is very important. So
right.
That would be my number one piece of advice to young lawyers is, and you may not be that person. You may not be that person that wants to go out and meet new people. But if you're going to do this, you kind of have to, and you're going to have to be in a situation where you're talking to people you don't know that well. And it gives you an opportunity to kind of mold your question asking skills, because it's not something that people are typically used to, is asking questions. But that's what we do as a profession. We ask questions. We have to.
So you mentioned something. You said personal injury protection.
Yes.
You're talking about University of Miami. So you took the Florida bar, right?
Correct.
Okay. And personal injury protection, we don't have that here in Indiana, right?
Well, no, not officially. So here in Indiana, we have what's called MedPay, which is kind of similar. It's no fault insurance. So you get in a car crash. If you have MedPay on your policy, which a lot of people do, your insurance company is obligated to pay for your medical bills. Or I think it also goes to lost wages. I'm not sure. But it depends on probably the policy. But yeah. Your MedPay here in Indiana is no fault. So it doesn't matter if you cause the crash or the other person causes the crash. If you send your medical bills and medical records to your own insurance company, whatever insurance company that is, they are supposed to, under the contract, pay for those medical bills, send you a check or send the medical provider the check for those medical bills. And typically you have to exhaust that before you can get into coverage from your own health insurance here. And that's kind of how it works. But it's not required. MedPay is not required on your policy here in Indiana. That's the difference between Indiana and Florida. In Florida, it's personal injury protection. MedPay, as it would be here down in Florida, it's required. So every insurance policy that covers an automobile in Florida has to have personal injury protection as a provision on the policy. So it's mandatory for all drivers. It's a $10,000 limit, so they have to have $10,000. And really the idea for personal injury protection down in Florida is that it's supposed to be quick and efficient, right? So you get hurt. This is supposed to get people immediate care that they need, so that there's no delay. There's no fighting between the two parties. Who's going to cover the medical bills? Who's going to cover if there's lost wages? It's supposed to give people a safety net, more or less, if they get in a car crash, because there's so many people in South Florida. There's so many car crashes that there could be a big problem if people are just sitting in court fighting over who's going to pay for these medical bills. So it's kind of a stopgap for that type of situation. So the difference between Indiana and Indiana MedPay and personal injury protection is that it's mandatory, and it's not, the state puts it out there that you have to have it.
Now, and in Florida, I know they had some recent legislative stuff go through and some recent laws go through, but is it still the case in Florida that in a first party case, which is when you have to sue essentially your own insurance company, in a first party case, you can recover your attorney fees? So
no, unfortunately. For many, many years, back to the 1970s, potentially 1969 on, there was a provision in Florida. I think it's 627-739, or that's what it was, but it was recently amended put forward by the governor, Ron DeSantis down there last year, where they got rid of attorney's fees. Okay, so before this, let's say you have a PIP case. Okay, and to be clear, PIP is usually I would be representing an actual medical provider. Okay, so up here I'm representing folks who get in a car crash, they're injured, and we're going after the other side's insurance company for their damages. Mm-hmm. Down in Florida, somebody would get in a car crash. They would use their PIP money on their own policy in order to go get medical services from hospital, chiropractor, orthopedic surgeon, whoever, masseuse, whatever. And that person, that medical provider would then send the bills to the insurance company. The insurance company is supposed to pay those bills. Well, that doesn't always happen. In fact, it typically never happens. They find a reason not to pay. They get another doctor to say you're not as injured as you actually are leading on to. They pay the medical provider the wrong amount, or they say that it wasn't lawfully rendered, which is a whole different bag of worms. But the insurance companies would find reasons not to pay. Those medical providers would send the cases to the law firm that I work for down in Florida, and then we would send a demand and then file a lawsuit to recover those benefits. So the reason we were able to do that so efficiently is because 627739, the statute down in Florida, allowed us to recover all of our attorney's fees against an insurance company in a first party case, which that would be, prior to this change in the law, that would be for PIP cases, homeowners cases, property damage cases, those types of things. But that's since been amended because, the governor thinks that it's going to cut down on the amount of lawsuits, and it will, because the medical providers and homeowners are now not going to have any incentive to sue their insurance companies because they won't be able to get their attorney's fees. So the insurance companies are just going to say, what are you going to do? Sue us? Because no lawyers will take the cases. That was the whole incentive of that statutory provision, is that lawyers would take these cases because we're talking about potentially like $10 in damages, technically, but it just allows the insurance companies now to shortchange homeowners and medical providers who probably a lot of them are going to go out of business because of this. So it will have the effect that the governor wants it to have down there, but it's going to unfortunately disproportionately affect homeowners as well as business owners down there who are probably going to have to shutter a lot of their businesses because they won't be able to keep the lights on.
It's going to affect a lot of normal, just like blue collar worker type people, their access to justice.
Yeah, 100%. And there's been some discussion about, because access to courts is actually a constitutional provision down there in Florida. It's written into the Constitution that access to courts is an absolute right for the citizens of Florida. And there's been some conversations about whether there's a constitutional challenge to this change in the law. And there may be, but we'll have to see what happens. So.
And I mean, we see the same thing, at our office at Hurst Limontes. If an insurance company can save a few bucks here and there, take that times 100 claims, that money starts to add up.
Oh, it adds up big time. And I mean, let's be honest, this is how insurance companies make their money.
Yeah.
They want people to be scared to make a claim. They want people to be scared to claim on their insurance so that their premiums don't go up. How many times do we hear that, Alex?
Right.
People saying, well, because we tell them, well, you've got this coverage in an instance just like this, where there's not enough insurance on the other side. You have to claim on your underinsured motorist coverage. Well, I don't want to do that. My premiums will go. They know that.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a scare tactic. And it's something that we're going to have to deal with. So
you did PIP cases down there for what, 4 or 5 years?
I did PIP cases down there from October 2013 until just like January of 2019. And I still do some work down there. I'm kind of involved in a little bit of some referral cases down there. So I do still get down there. I get consulted on some things as well. And my license is still active down there. And actually, we're working on some cases down in Florida right now. Hurst Limontes is working on some cases down in Florida right now. So because you, as I understand it, are also a Florida barred attorney.
Yes, but different from you. I'm a native Floridian, which frankly is rare to find as it stands.
Yes, yes.
But I'm one of those folks that left Florida, came up to Indiana, fell in love with the Midwest, mostly because of the people, not necessarily because of the weather. Although this fall weather is some of my favorite. And then I ended up staying in Florida. I love Florida. I love going back to see my family. It's a nice place to visit, but I've already lived there, and I don't know if I'd necessarily want to live there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know what you mean, because I was down there for about 10 years, and I think it was time to move back. And I love to visit. It's a great place to visit.
Yeah.
Great place to be barred, at least, because, you take cases and you go down there and do some work and help folks out and things of that nature. But I was with Patino's office down in Florida for about 6 years formerly, and trying cases and lots of cases down there. Just those PIP cases add up, and there's lots of cases. So I was in court, like I would say at least 3 or 4 days a week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Every day. Pre-trial conferences, calendar calls for trial, summary judgments. I already, my first day as a lawyer, when I got admitted down there in Florida, my law firm down there gave me a summary judgment to defend. The State Farm was trying to get a case dismissed based on some coverage issues. And we had gathered evidence and had some client filed an affidavit and signed an affidavit. And I went and argued it in front of a judge who I won't mention specifically here, but who's on the federal bench down there in the Southern District, who wasn't on the federal bench at the time. He was on the bench on Miami Beach. He was newly appointed down there, and he was actually the judge that swore me in that morning. And then I argued a summary judgment in front of him later that day. So he gave me a little bit of a hard time. He was kind of rapid fire questioning me, but he's told me later on that I did a good job, and I appreciate that because it was a pretty intense experience on your first day on the job. Oh
yeah, and I mean, I had Mark Lopez on the show, and Mark says this, and it's actually absolutely true because Mark and I were assigned to the same judge as new lawyers. Tough judges make great lawyers.
I agree.
They do. Because that's really going to be the best way you're going to learn as a trial lawyer. Yeah. And
that's what they're trying to do, I think, when they're not being tough. They're questioning you because they want you to do it the right way, because they want to make sure that lawyers that are practicing it the way. So I think that is important.
So let's talk about some of your cases, particularly one case that sticks out in your mind is just, I don't want to say like the craziest or most complicated, but just kind of like the one that you'll never forget.
I mean, I'm sure I'll have crazier ones as time goes on, and I have had some wild ones here in Indiana, but I think that one of my wildest cases is the first case I ever tried down in South Florida. I'd probably been a lawyer for 2 years, and we finally got a case that was going to trial. In PIP, you have to prove a few things. You have to prove coverage, and you have to prove that the treatment is reasonable, related, and medically necessary. And there's all kinds of defenses to that. So in this particular case, one of my good mentors, Ryan Peterson, and I had moved for summary judgment to prove to the court that the treatment was reasonable, related, and medically necessary. This was a medical provider down there in South Florida. I won't say the name. The owner was a Cuban immigrant who had come, and she had opened a medical facility, and she had several different medical providers in the facility that worked with her. I scratch that. She was not the owner. She was working at the facility, but she was kind of our main contact. The owner was one of the medical providers. So we had moved for summary judgment. The judge had granted that summary judgment. Okay. Leading up to the trial, some depositions had been taken by State Farm, and State Farm had argued that essentially the medical treatment that was provided, they didn't have to pay for, which was about $10,000 in medical services, because they said that it wasn't lawfully rendered. Okay. So it means a lot of things down in Florida. There's governing boards which put out different rules. Mm-hmm. And back in, I want to say this was probably 2015 or 2016, maybe, there were certain rules about lawfully rendered. Well, State Farm, their defense lawyers who were just billing the case up, were arguing, well, this wasn't lawfully rendered because the treatment wasn't provided by a medical provider that was wholly owned by someone who had a medical license. We'll just kind of boil it down to that. So we went to trial on that issue because we had gotten everything else knocked out. Well, the State Farm had taken depositions. They had deposed a few people. They deposed the person who actually gave the treatment, deposed somebody who worked at the office, and there were some conflicting issues there, but they couldn't get them subpoenaed for trial. So we showed up to trial, and the only testimony that came in was the judge read in these deposition transcripts. It was it was so strange. I mean, usually during trials, there's somebody on the witness stand and you get to question, either we get to question them or the other side gets to question them. And then the other side gets to kind of cross-examine them and try to pull things out of them that they want. Well, we didn't have any of that. We had a judge who sat there and read deposition transcripts because these people hadn't shown up. And actually, we ended up doing the same thing because we had tried to get this adjuster served from State Farm to come in and talk about the lawfully rendered that we had taken this deposition. We couldn't get that person served. So they didn't show up either. So they were all these depositions read in, which was kind of strange. So we got that evidence in. State Farm put in evidence of some checks that were made out that they said prove that, this person was actually the owner when the other person wasn't the owner, and all these different things. And it was just such a strange case, and such insurance company minutia, wherein they are like, well, you did everything right. Like, the person needed the treatment and it was medically necessary and it was done and all these other things, but we're not going to pay we don't have to pay because this person's name wasn't on this piece of paper correctly. So essentially the jury looked at them like they had two heads, these State Farm attorneys. We lambasted their evidence and actually used their evidence to our benefit at closing, because they were saying this check is made out to this person, when in reality, the check wasn't even from the time frame that we were talking about, which made it completely irrelevant to the actual evidence in the case. And the jury came back and said, no, we're going to award you $10,000, or your client $10,000 and every penny plus interest. And State Farm said they were going to appeal and all these other things, but they ended up paying the judgment and everything went our way. So nice. It was kind of State Farm was making it out to be like they never said fraud, but they insinuated fraud the entire time. They kind of said, well, this lady wasn't doing things the right way. And, she's a Cuban immigrant and, all these other things. And the jury just didn't buy it. They didn't buy it at all, which is fantastic because, it was a good recovery for the company. And good to get a win on your first trial, too, which was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
So
I think that's interesting. You mentioned fraud and we deal with that here as trial lawyers. To me, at least as a trial lawyer, it's infuriating. I really just want to say, why don't you guys just say it?
Yeah.
Just say what you mean,
Yep.
And then when you do that in front of a jury, you can call them out during your closing argument.
Absolutely.
Say what you mean because they don't like that, So difference between doing PIP work down in Florida versus now that you've transitioned up to Indiana and you're doing third-party liability, personal injury cases, and workers' compensation cases. What do you think the biggest difference is between working down there versus up here as a lawyer?
Well, down there I was working with business folks, typically people who owned a business. And, I think there's, unfortunately, up here, dealing with what I deal with up here, sometimes people are a little bit more desperate. I mean, these are folks who they don't have any income. Down in Florida, this is one case to this typically business, owner that's like, hey, I'm owed a certain amount of money, but it's on one case. It's typically only a matter of $10,000 between what they're owed or what they're not owed. Mm-hmm. Here in Indiana, I mean, you're talking about folks who are with severe injuries, traumatic brain injuries, things that are keeping them from being able to work, things are keeping them from being able to engage with their family, sometimes pick up their kids, and it's a little bit more dire up here. We're really trying to recover things recover money and make a recovery for these folks to change their lives for the better up here. And a little bit more pressure maybe because, our clients ask us to do things in a manner that's expedient because they've got these problems. Maybe they can't work, or maybe they got hurt at work in a work comp case and the work comp carrier hasn't paid anything, or they haven't paid any temporary total disability benefits or helped them with their bills or anything like that. I mean, and there's a lot of situations like that people call in and they're like, hey, I got hurt 6 months ago and no one's done anything for me. And really, that's what the insurance companies are betting on, people not taking any action. So I think sometimes we have to help people make that decision a little bit like, hey, look, I mean, they're not going to do anything until we get involved. They're not going to do it. They're not going to do the things that you want them to do until we set a demand or actually file a lawsuit and show them like, you're not just going to go away. You're not just going to, grin and bear it, because that's what they want you to do. They want that broken ankle to just heal on itself and you not make a claim because you don't want your premiums to go up, or you don't want to look bad in front of your insurance company. So I think that's some of the main differences. Obviously, up here, there's no attorney's fees provision. So our part of our case is recovering fees for ourselves from the client's cases, which is something that I wasn't really didn't know that I needed to do until I moved back up here. But I'm also doing things that are a lot different than auto cases up here. I'm doing trip and fall cases, chemical exposure cases, mold cases, obviously auto negligence cases. Right. But I mean,
things falling from various places on people.
I don't know how. Cases. Yeah. Sometimes I get these cases in and I'm like, this is how this happened. I mean, but it makes sense. And it's very interesting. I mean, I think my investigations are a little bit more intense here because, sometimes you got to go or wrongful death cases where somebody gets, injured in a nightclub shooting or something like that. You have to go and you have to take pictures and you have to ask questions, and because that evidence goes away quickly if you don't get on the investigation. So I find myself in very specific situations here where, the investigations are so vital. So I like to think I take pride in making sure that we do good investigations. That's probably one of the biggest differences as well.
Yeah, because you got to build that case, right?
You have to. And sometimes there's some lawyers that don't do that. They kind of wait for the case to come to them, but we're not. That's not in our mantra here. So.
Right. So you made a really good point, Chip. You were talking about time. I've been doing this a while, and you have too. The insurance companies have all the time, right?
Yes.
It's on their side. And the more time that people take, the more likely the insurance company is to get off cheap,
right?
Get a discount,
exactly.
Right? No discounted, a discount on justice,
exactly.
And the same concept applies. Time concept applies to evidence, like you said.
Correct.
For example, weren't you were up north a couple weeks ago, right? Investigating on a death claim.
Yes.
Restaurant.
A tragic case where a young man was shot as a result of what we believe to be some negligent security, a restaurant up in South Bend. It happened, I want to say, maybe about a month ago. Yeah. I think about a month ago, but you got to get on that case because there's surveillance footage that it's going to go away. The insurance company says we're going to hold on to this, but if you don't get an evidence preservation letter out, they could just let it go away. There's pictures that need to be taken. There's, witness statements that need to be taken. So, I was up there trying to gather some evidence and just to get a feel also for the scene. I really believe you have to visit the scene of where these things happen to kind of get a feel for it, because you can look on Google Maps, you can look on the internet and say, this is where this happened, and you can see it. But if you're really standing there, you're going to notice things that you wouldn't notice if you hadn't visited there. Maybe there's a camera from another restaurant or another business close by that you don't see on Google Maps, and things of that nature. So I kind of take that to heart and go to the scene typically.
Right. Excuse me. I'll tell you a short story. I had a case. I think you'd been working here. It was a death case, motorcycle case. We did the same thing. I don't think you came with me, but I found an ATM across the street from the intersection. And even though the ATM, that we pulled the video footage from the ATM, and it didn't show the color of the lights because it was an intersection case, our client was killed, so he couldn't say anything to the police about how the crash occurred. And the defendant, she told the police that our client ran the red light in his motorcycle. So we pulled that camera footage from the ATM, and you could see clearly the traffic patterns that it was actually the defendant. She ran the red light. And that was a case. He was an adult, but he was unmarried with no dependent children. Here in Indiana, we're capped at $300,000. Right. So I was able to recover that for him. But that was one of those situations where, like you said, we have to act quickly, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, to be able to secure our clients. So, all right. So you're up here now. How long have you been practicing up here in Indiana?
So I was admitted in Indiana 2019. So I guess over 4 years, going on 5 years now.
Right.
Time flies. Spent COVID up here. That was an interesting time for practicing law in general. So lots of Zoom hearings and Zoom depositions and Zoom meetings, but we persevered through that. But Yeah, going on 5 years now. So.
And you have a family, right, up here?
I do. I have my lovely wife and then my 2 young children.
So I ask all the lawyer parents the same question too. What is the most difficult thing about being a parent and then having a job like trial lawyer, for example, that is not a normal 9 to 5? It's a pick up the phone when you're needed.
Yeah, it's time and making sure you have time for those loved ones, because, the clients are important to me. They're important to the firm. And, not just because we, it's our job for them to be important, but because, these people are injured and they're counting on us. So I've always been hard on myself, and I will continue always to be hard on myself, but I want to be there for those folks. And sometimes people just want to call and they want to talk. I mean, they just want to tell you what's going on, and they need somebody to talk to. Not everybody in our clientele has somebody to talk to or anybody that'll listen. Sometimes you can tell that they're just calling in and they want to talk, and try to be there for folks because this is, I know we've talked about it, this is probably some of these people's worst day in their lives that they're dealing with. I mean, especially if it's catastrophic injury or something that changes their lives forever, or wrongful death. I mean, I've dealt with so many of those over the years that I know that, I mean, these are people that they're really hurting, not just from a physical standpoint, from an emotional standpoint. And, part of it is being there for those folks and listening to them, no matter, even if it's not about the case, they just want to tell us how hard things have been and, kind of get that across. So, and it's part of our job to listen so that we can use those things in the case as well if we need to make it clear to the insurance company how bad this case is and why we're valuing it the way we're valuing it. So time is always something that you never have enough of in this
right.
in this particular field. But there's a lot of stress and there's a lot of pressure too, because again, you're dealing with people who's maybe just went through the worst day in their life, and I put a lot of pressure on myself to make sure that I do the best that I can for those folks, and I'm pushing the case forward as quickly as I can in an efficient but also thorough way. Like we talked about, making sure that we've got the evidence that we need and pushing it, because we know that the insurance company a lot of times isn't going to do anything until you've got them in a corner.
Right.
So try to be reasonable when we can with the insurance companies, but you got to corner them to an extent, and you got to get evidence that's going to put them in that position that they want to say, okay, I'm going to cry uncle and I'm going to pay you some money to make this go away, or make sure you have the evidence to get to in order to go try the case.
If I asked you who is your most influential mentor and the best piece of advice?
I want to say, I think the mentor-mentee relationship is so incredibly important if you want to be a lawyer. And I mean like any type of lawyer. I would not be here in any sense of the word if I did not have great mentors. And not just good mentor lawyers, but, people along the way, people in business who, when maybe I wasn't seeing eye to eye with my dad or somebody like that, somebody who could be like, hey, look, you're not making the right decisions. You should be making different decisions than this. And that's not coming from your dad. That's coming from me. I'm the one that's telling you that and saying that, and then saying, because I care about you and I want to see you succeed in certain things. So you got to find, if you're young, you got to find good mentors, even if they're not a professional sense, people that are going to give you good advice and, that are going to kind of point you on the right track, or at least throw you a bone here and there,
Yeah.
Let you tag along and see how they do things. And then you can kind of mold the way that you're going to do things off of the way that they do things. So that being said, I think Ryan Peterson down in South Florida, my first trial partner, and really the guy who showed me the ropes as a lawyer, because when you get out of law school, and you know this, Alex, you really don't know what you're doing at all.
No.
I mean, law school teaches you a lot of theories, and they tell you like, hey, these are some cases and this is how you should try to think. But once you get that law degree and you pass the bar in whatever state you're in, you really don't know anything you don't know how to do anything. You really don't know how to go speak in front of judges. You don't know how to present a case. You don't know how to gather evidence. You don't know how to do anything. So you really should try to find somebody who's going to be able to show you the ropes that way. And Ryan Peterson was really that person for me, because I was the first lawyer hired on at that firm after Ryan was, and he had been there for several years. And, I don't want to, things flow downhill, and part of it is you come in as a new lawyer, you're going to get kind of the not as desirable tasks in any law firm, which is part of, the process. And you need to learn how to do those things in order so you can move up in the chain of command. And part of teaching me the ropes was, I think Peterson was kind of teaching me things that he didn't want to have to do so much anymore. Like maybe, he was probably making more money for the firm being in the office more often than being in the courtroom, which, because that's part of the thing as well, is insurance companies keep you in the courtroom because that's not always necessarily the time where you're making the most money for yourself or for the firm. So I was in court all the time, and they gave me the tools to do that. And also a shout out to Richard Patino down there in South Florida, somebody who just, I think first off, going back to, I'll come back to Richard Patino, but Ryan Peterson, you asked about good advice. He told me, and he said, Chip, it's okay to make mistakes, because if you make mistakes, you're going to learn from them. Now you have to do that. Okay. If you make a mistake, you have to learn from that mistake, or else, this piece of wisdom doesn't really work. But he said, it's okay for you to make mistakes. I will never put you in a position where you make a mistake that we can't fix to some extent. Okay. So he said, it's okay to make mistakes, but as long as you don't make mistakes because you're not prepared, which I'm just not somebody doesn't come prepared. I usually am, I've researched and I've done the investigation that I need to, and I go in and I've got a plan. So that kind of works to my characteristics and my mantras. But he basically told me, it's okay to make mistakes as long as you learn from them. And I'm never going to let you make a mistake that we can't eventually fix. So that's good advice I got from Ryan Peterson down there. Richard Patino, Richard gave me a lot of advice as to just business in general. He's a tough business guy, and he I don't know if he ever gave me like really good, like sage, like wisdom advice, but he would say things like, it's okay to be tough in business, and you should be tough in business, but you should be fair and you should be loyal. And if don't give people handouts necessarily, but you should always be fair with people that you're doing business with. And he was always fair with me, extremely fair. You don't necessarily make a lot as a first year associate, even down in South Florida. But as time pressed on and as I got more experience, once a year I would go in and I would talk to Richard, and, he would always be fair with me and give me raises that we both agreed were reasonable. But he was tough. I mean, and you got to be a tough negotiator, especially in this particular profession. You have to be tough because the insurance company wants you to roll over and go try and sell a settlement to your client. And that's just not the way you got to do it. So he told me to be a tough negotiator, and I think he taught me how to negotiate. Richard did, because you got to come in with a plan. You got to say exactly why you want what you want. You got to have, supports for it, but you're going to have to compromise, because everything you say, there's going to be something on the other end that they're going to say, yeah, well, that may be kind of true, but have you looked at this thing too? And you got to be willing to compromise, which maybe that's really what it is. Richard taught me how. I know you probably don't want me to say this, Alex, but you've been a great mentor for me. When I moved up here, I didn't have a job. I didn't even have a law license up here yet, because it was an emergency for me to get up here due to some family health issues. But you gave me a shot, which you didn't have to, because I had no experience in personal injury necessarily, but you did. And I appreciate that. I want to tell you that. So
well, thank you.
You've taken the time to show me the ropes, and I've definitely stumbled through things, but we're at a place where I think we're in a good position now. So I do appreciate that.
Well, thanks. And it's like Ryan said, stumbling is okay.
Yeah.
Stumbling is okay. Get your ass back up and you keep going.
Yeah.
And you never lose focus of who you are helping.
Right.
Just like you said, down south in Florida, you were helping companies, medical providers, doctors. Here, we're helping people, just normal, everyday people that frankly remind me a lot of where I came from.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so passionate about it. So, well, Chip, I appreciate it. It's been a wonderful time. we will definitely have you back on.
Cool.
In the future. We're going to talk about some more details about going to trial and some of your favorite things about trying cases and things like that. I really want to talk to you a lot about that, especially as a trial lawyer. So, but thank you.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for listening to the Circle City Conversations podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more future conversations.